Here we are back with yet another instruction course on the retinopathy of prematurity, and we have a panel of very august speakers here with us who are going to elaborate and discuss this particular disease in details. Uh, I know it is late in the hour, but whoever are the listeners, apart from the participants, please hang around because I'm sure you'll get to learn a lot more from this deliberation than you would reading your book. So, without further ado, I go to the first speaker of the day, the youngest member, Dr. Anisha Rathod, who is going to talk to us about the newer classification, the screening guidelines. So, over to Anisha for her presentation.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So, retinopathy of prematurity is a rapidly changing disease condition in the newborns. It can regress completely or progress to severe retinal detachment and vision loss in fewer babies. Immature retina is defined as retinal vessels not reaching the ora serrata, and caliber of the vessels is normal, with vessels showing a dichotomous branching pattern. After birth, in 2 to 3 weeks, ROP starts manifesting and can be seen on fundoscopy. So this is the normal pathogenesis we are all aware about ROP. So the screening guidelines start between 20 to 30 days of life, the most important being the 21st day of life. Screening must be done for babies born before 34 to 35 weeks of gestational age at birth, or birth weight of 2000 grams or less, or infants more than 34 weeks of gestational age with risk factors. If babies who are born early or babies who are very preterm or very low birth weight are supposed to be screened earlier than the other babies. These are the risk factors which will be elaborated later. The classification is based upon the zone, extent, stage, and plus. So zone 1 is based upon twice the radius from optic nerve to the fovea. Zone 2 is nasal involvement to the temporal equator. And zone 3 is the residual present anterior to the zone 2. The extent is defined by the hours of clock from 1 to 12, with each clock hour at 30 degrees. So as for the new ICROP classification, which is the third edition, there have been some new key components added to the classification. So the definition of three retinal zones centered on the optic disc, the location of the most posterior retinal vascularization or ROP lesion denotes the zone for the eye, and the definition of a posterior zone 2 has been added, which begins at the margin between zone 1 and zone 2 and extends into zone 2 for 2 disc diameters, as we can see in this figure. Another term, that is the notch, is being used to describe an incursion by the ROP lesion of 1 to 2 clock hours or into a more posterior zone. The ROP zone for such eyes should be noted by the most posterior zone of retinal vascularization with the qualifier notch. That is, for example, if it is zone 1, then we'll be writing zone 1 secondary to the notch. Another example is if ROP is in zone 2 in most places, but there is a temporal notch extending into zone 1, it should be noted as zone 1 secondary to the notch so that it can be distinguished. Now, stage 0 is where the vascularization is incomplete. If no ROP lesion is present, we have to term it as incomplete vascularization accompanied by the zone of vascularization. We are not supposed to write immature or no ROP. Then stage 1 to 3 are the stages of acute disease. And stage 1 is the demarcation line between the vascular and avascular retina. Stage 2 is the ridge, where we can see the isolated tufts, what are commonly referred to as popcorn. Stage 3 is when there is extraretinal fibrovascular proliferation of flat neovascularization, which has a ragged appearance and it projects perpendicularly into the vitreous. Stage 4 is partial retinal detachment with stage 4A, that is extrafoveal, and stage 4B, which is foveal involvement. Eyes with AROP can demonstrate a unique posterior so-called volcanotractional detachment, generally involving the fovea, in which the peripheral retina remains attached. Stage 5 is where typical retinal detachments are tractional, and it has been further subcategorized into three classes. 5A, where the optic disc is visible by ophthalmoscopy. 5B, where it is not visible due to retrolental fibrovascular tissue or funnel detachment, and 5C is findings of stage 5B accompanied by anterior segment abnormalities. These are the pictures of stage 5A, B, and C as per the new ICROC classification. The plus disease spectrum. Now, as per ICROC classification 3, the terms pre, plus, and AROP should be thought as a continuous spectrum of retinal vascular changes. These are about 34 images, out of which there are around 6 images over here. The green image represents the normal image and the red image represents the plus image. These had been used for categorization of the plus disease. Abnormal plus disease is abnormal vascular dilatation of the posterior pole vessels in presence of peripheral retinopathy. Iris vascular engorgement, poor pupillary dilatation, and vitreous haze are seen, and it is denoted by a plus sign. So pre-plus disease has been defined as to be demonstrated with more arterial tortuosity or more venous dilatation than normal. The necessity for increased frequency of ROP examinations is required. Aggressive retinopathy of prematurity is the new name for aggressive posterior retinopathy of prematurity. Initially, we would say it was seen in smallest and most premature babies, but larger preterm babies are also at a risk. There is the appearance of vascular abnormalities with posterior vessel abnormalities, which is out of proportion to the extent and severity. They are mostly circumferential with vascular loops and no demarcation lines, and hemorrhages may be present between vascular and avascular junctions. Now, staged ROP versus aggressive ROP can be differentiated based on these points, the important being the pattern of the vessels, the important being the junctions, the location, and the progression timeline, which is extremely important. Hybrid ROP is a component of both staged ROP and aggressive ROP, where in staged ROP, we see avascular pockets and shunts, and in hybrid, we can see the shunting of vessels as well. Threshold and pre-threshold disease, we are all aware about this, and the classification which we use for deciding the treatment protocol. Now, long-term sequelae could be retinal, late tractional rhegmatogenous or exudative retinal detachments, retinoschisis, persistent avascular retina, macular anomalies, retinal vascular changes, or glaucoma. So post-screening, we need to have periodic monitoring of all these babies to assess visual acuity and to look for delayed visual maturation. We have to follow them up for the refractive status and strabismus. Children with threshold or ROP, they have to be tailored individually for their follow-up examinations. And we have to make sure that the disease has fully regressed, and a follow-up examination has to be carried out at 3 months, cycloplegic refraction at 6 months, or annually. This is the classification of macular changes that we see. Now, counseling is very important for the parents. We have to counsel them. We have to give out written and general information to them. Now, parents whose children have been diagnosed with ROP, they have to be personally counseled by the ophthalmologist about the disease and the availability of the management plans. In screening method, we use an indirect ophthalmoscope with a 20, 28D or 30D lens based upon our own preference and comfort. We use an Alfonso eye speculum, a scleral indenter, and we nest the baby as shown in this picture so that the baby can be stabilized and we can examine the child. Throughout the examination, we have to make sure that the child is crying so that there are no apneic spells. The RETCAM is another good modality for examination or mass screening of these children. The only problem is that it is not very sensitive, so sometimes very early stages can be missed. These are the new recommended follow-up guidelines based by the ICROC classification 3rd edition. Now, in later phases of ROP, they have added up the definition of regression, which means involution and resolution. The signs include decreased plus, better pupillary dilatation, greater media clarity, and resolution of intraretinal hemorrhages. And the regression is characterized by thinning and whitening of neovascular tissue. Reactivation is recurrence of acute phase features, which is usually seen after anti-VEGF treatment. And vascular reactivation includes recurrence of pre-plus or plus disease. Hemorrhages can occur around fronds of extraretinal vessels, and extraretinal new vessels can occur and may be relatively delicate compared to those acute ROP. Documentation of these stages is extremely important to label them as reactivated. For example, if there is a presence of demarcation line during reactivation, it would be noted as reactivated stage 1. These are some of the pictures showing the asterisk marks are showing and the arrows are showing the signs of reactivation. Now, and another component added is persistent avascular retina, which means that after spontaneous or treatment-induced regression, vascularization into the peripheral avascular retina can be complete or incomplete, and the latter is termed as persistent avascular retina. and it needs to be described by its location and its extent. These are some of the images where the asterisks are showing the peripheral, the persistent avascular retina. And this is the summary of the key components of the new classification and the new terminologies which has been added.
Thank you, Anisha, for very nicely elaborating the new classification and all the new terminologies. Every time a new classification comes up, it requires a little time for it to sink in, and I'm sure that is a phase that everyone is going through, because to get unused to something which is old and grasp something new just take a little bit of time. But thank you so much for elaborating on it, and you've put it very well. Going on to our next speaker, who is none other than Sucheta, who's from Pune. She's done extensive work in ROP, and she's an internationally known figure also. And I would request Sucheta to come on and give her talk on ROP, the risk factors, and telescreening, which they are doing in great numbers at Pune. Over to you, Sucheta.
Thank you, ma'am, for the kind words. And thank you for this opportunity. So I'm going to speak on risk factors for ROP and a few words about telescreening. There is no need to tell that prematurity itself is the biggest risk factor for ROP, and Anisha has nicely explained about the screening criteria, but one must remember that bigger babies are also not immune to developing ROP, especially those who have a stormy neonatal course must be screened for ROP. Second most important risk factor to be discussed is supplemental oxygen therapy, and one must be aware that oxygen is a drug, and overdose of it, like any other drug, can cause adverse effects. And in this, in the preterm children, the effect is seen in the form of oxygen-induced retinopathy, which develops as aggressive ROP. And oxygen remains the most crucial modifiable risk factor. And oxygen per se is not the culprit, but unmonitored oxygen therapy is the culprit for most kind of aggressive ROPs that we see here in India. And ideal SpO2 level to be maintained in NICU should be between 89 and 93%. There are over 28 risk factors which have been documented in the literature, but of course, in the interest of time, I'm not going to speak on each and every one, but I'll be just briefly touching upon the common risk factors that we encounter in clinical practice. So risk factors can be broadly divided into 4 categories: maternal, pre and perinatal risk factors, infant risk factors, and comorbidities and treatments. So the evidence on maternal risk factors is not very strong. It's a moderate level of evidence that is available in the literature. Factors such as pregnancy-induced hypertension, advanced maternal age, smoking, and anemia are indirectly responsible for ROP, because these are the factors which make a lady or woman prone for preterm delivery, or IUGR, intrauterine growth retardation. Diabetes mellitus can cause a state of hyperglycemia, which is responsible for increased retinal VEGF. And diabetes is also known to be associated with respiratory distress syndrome in a newborn, which is why such newborn are more prone to develop ROP. IVF pregnancies are definitely on the rise, especially in the metros, and it is a well-known fact that IVF pregnancies are very much at risk of very preterm deliveries, which is why these babies are also at high risk of developing ROP. Chorioamnionitis can cause bronchopulmonary dysplasia in a child, in a newborn baby, and they can develop ROP as a result of this. Then there are certain infant risk factors where, generally white or brown infants are at higher risk of developing ROP compared to African infants or black infants. Twins or triplets are at higher risk of developing it. And newborn babies with low Apgar score are also more at risk due to various lung issues that they tend to face. Then there are so many other comorbidities and treatments which make a child prone to develop ROP. Most common challenge that we see is pulmonary issues in the form of respiratory distress syndrome or BPD, or those requiring prolonged respiratory support in the form of ventilation or supplemental oxygen therapy. Severe anemia of prematurity, blood transfusion, or erythropoietin transfusion is also known to cause ROP, or is predisposes a newborn to develop ROP, because in severe anemia, there is, of course, the reduced oxygenation of tissue, especially retinal tissue. And how erythropoietin or blood transfusion can cause ROP is by reducing the angiogenesis, predisposing a child to more hypoxia, and erythropoietin can also cause oxidative stress, which can rapidly result in progression of ROP. Thrombocytopenia is one recently documented risk factor because platelets also play an important role in angiogenesis. Sepsis, PDA, necrotizing enterocolitis, intraventricular hemorrhage, poor weight gain, and prolonged parenteral nutrition makes newborn prone to develop ROP. Now, a few words about telescreening. ROP as a disease perfectly fulfills the well-known Wilson-Jagner's principles or criteria for any disease to be screened, because it is an important health problem. There is accepted treatment or standard of care available for patients with recognized disease. Facilities for diagnosis and treatment are available, and there is a suitable test or examination available to diagnose the disease in early stage, which is why ROP perfectly fits into the criteria for telescreening. So how does telescreening work? Basically, in telescreening, there is an image acquisition by a digital wide field camera meant for neonatal screening, and the images captured with the camera are transferred either on a smartphone using a special software, or transferred through email to the base hospital where an expert would usually grade them. There are also models where non-physician experts are being used to diagnose ROP, or at least identify referral warranted ROP. So there are various advantages of telescreening model. You can, of course, provide a wider screening coverage because the camera is usually portable and it can be easily transferred from one NICU facility to another. And this helps in bridging the urban-rural gap. So babies in the rural setup can access expert care available usually in urban area through this telemedicine model, because they are not always in a position to travel to cities to get an expert opinion. Then one can use paramedical staff for image acquisition, where the most precious time of an ophthalmologist would be saved, and he or she can focus on other clinical activities. The images can act as an excellent teaching or counseling tool, and photo documentation is something which will save you from potential medico-legal issues. And there are strong future prospects for use of, just one second, sorry for this disturbance. Yeah, and just 1 moment. Yeah, and there are strong future prospects for use of artificial intelligence based screening in ROP in near future. So there are various telemedicine based screening models all over the world. I would just like to briefly show you the models from India. We also have published our telescreening model, and of course the KidROP model remains the world's largest telescreening model. And we are also working on use of artificial intelligence in ROP. The first publication was recently published this year. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Sucheta, for very concisely giving us the risk factors and whatever is entailed in the telescreening program. Only thing I wanted to ask you is that why don't you all call it a PUNROP model?
So ours is like a hybrid model, where we use smartphone as well as, expert ophthalmologists. So, but this is a nice suggestion, ma'am. We will give it a thought, definitely.
Gujarat, you have it as PUNROP or something like that.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll come to the question answers later.
Yeah.
We'll go over to none other than Prachi. Prachi is the second youngest amongst all of us. And she, even at a young age, she's done considerable amount of work in ROP, and she's a pediatric ophthalmologist, but ROP is one of her passions. So today we are going to listen to her speak on lasers in ROP. Over to you, Prachi. We can't hear you, dear. Prachi, you're muted.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay. Just give me a minute to share the screen.
The screen is shared, just make it full screen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, madam, for the kind introduction, and thank you for making me a part of this course. So I would talk about lasers in ROP. To start with, what is the full form of laser? So that is light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. So the common types of laser that are used in ROP are the argon green as well as the diode laser. Each of it has its few plus and minuses. So the argon green, the burns are at the level of RP, while in diode, the burns are at a slightly deeper level, at the deeper choroidal burns. Because of the level, with argon green, there are greater chances of cataract as compared to that with diode. However, argon green laser is easily available, especially in city like Bombay, we can rent it. But while diode is not that easily available. The good part is either of the lasers are effective for treatment if they are done in a good manner. So pre-laser, what do we really need to do? So the child should be dilated with the ROP drops, which includes 1% tropicamide and 2.5% phenylephrine drops. I am deliberately not talking about cyclopentolate because I think we have almost stopped using that for the dilatation. Commercially available drops are there from Orolab, or it can be made by half dilution of the tropicamide plus eye drops. Drops are to be instilled 2 or 3 times at an interval of 10 minutes, approximately an hour before the procedure. The child should be wrapped nicely. So generally we keep the feet outside where the pulse ox is attached, and the tape is attached around the arms as well as the knees. Do not repeat the drops more than 4 times if the pupils are not dilating. Do not use adult tropicamide plus eye drops for the same. Ensure that the child is fed and burped 30 to 60 minutes prior to the procedure. The procedure is done under topical anesthesia. Other requirements are similar to that. Those are required for screening: alfonso speculum depressor and lubricant eye drops to hydrate the cornea. The procedure can be done in the NICU or in the operating room or a clean temperature controlled room. Pulse and saturation is to be monitored, and there should be a standby neonatologist or pediatric anesthetist to handle any emergency if it arises. Now, the laser machine settings, generally the power needs to be adjusted depending on the type of the burn we are getting. It is approximately between 200 to 400 with an interval of 0.1 to 0.3 seconds. Intensity is grayish white. The power needs to be adjusted slightly for the anterior and superior retina, which requires lesser power as compared to the posterior and inferior retina, which requires more power. Pattern has to be confluent, which is defined as half burn width apart. So there was this study that compared the single spot versus the diode, the confluent laser versus the single spot laser. And it concluded that the confluent method is far superior to the single spot method because the retreatment was required to a considerable level of around 6.5% in the single spot group. While starting the treatment, the laser should start posterior to the ridge and should move anteriorly. As we move anteriorly, the power should be reduced by 20 to 30%. Now, the way we do laser can probably vary and differ from person to person. So what I personally prefer to do is laser one area and go from a lasered area to an unlasered area. Alternatively, you can mark the posterior as well as the anterior border near the ora and then fill the laser in between. Important is to check that entire area is completely lasered. So while doing the laser treatment, the visualization of the posterior retina can be done by just stabilizing the globe against the inferior pharyngeal conjunctiva. Visualization of the anterior retina is done by gentle depression close to the limbus, just 1 millimeter away from the limbus. It should not be too farther away. Do not depress too hard and release the pressure immediately, because that can cause pupillary constriction, intraocular hemorrhage, and corneal edema. And keep the cornea adequately irrigated. That is important for a clear view of the retina while doing the laser. Simplified indications for laser is any plus disease. It may be in any zone. It may be zone 1 or 2, aggressive ROP, and eyes with stage 3 in zone 1 or zone 2. Now, single versus multiple sittings. It depends on the comfort of the surgeon and the tolerability of the baby. Frankly, number of sittings are immaterial as long as the laser is completed. So this is an example of a laser done wherein we can see certain skip areas, and we can also see that the neovascularization has not regressed completely. So this is the incorrect way of doing the laser. However, we add on to the laser in the next sitting, and then we see over a week, the new vessels have completely regressed. Now, there's another concept of doing the laser posterior to the ridge. Should we be doing that? Well, there are again studies which have studied whether doing posterior laser to the ridge is useful or not. And it is shown to be useful in late stage 3 as well as stage 4A ROP following failed laser treatment to the avascular retina in the threshold disease. Also, this can be delivered in the severe stage 3 ROP in zone 2. This was another article that studied the laser photocoagulation posterior to the ridge in severe stage 3. Again, it was found to be safe and effective, and this could be used either as the primary treatment or for failed laser treatment as a add-on to the earlier laser that was done. Now, when does a laser treatment become challenging? One is a non-dilating pupils, and second is a vitreous haze. So these are the ocular, I can say, challenges that we face. The other challenges are sometimes the baby having episodes of apnea or ocular cardiac reflex, or the CPAP being there while doing the laser. So again, tip, start laser on any visible avascular area that you see. The pupils start dilating as the laser is delivered, and with gentle massage of the globe. Now, laser in aggressive ROP. Again, this was a paper that compared single versus multiple session laser sittings in cases of aggressive ROP. In group A, there was only a single session laser that was done, while in group B, there were 2 sessions. First was delivered to the avascular periphery, and there was an add-on laser 7 days later once the fronts retracted. So these are photographs that are showing the same. We can see these fronts over here, and they have bled later on, while in group B, this is the avascular area that is formed, and laser has been added onto that area. This study concluded that 2-stage laser procedure produced fewer and smaller hemorrhages and no fibrosis compared with a single session, and both had favorable outcomes. A hybrid form of ROP, I don't know whether we can use this term with the new classification, but yes, we do see this ROP wherein we see loops as well as stage which is interspersed with each other. It's a mixed type of ROP. And there 3 patterns are described. One is loops at the junction of the vascular and avascular retina. Type 2 is ridge in the posterior vascularized retina as seen in this picture. And type 3 is ill-defined ridge close to the optic disc. Now, this was difficult to characterize earlier. However, treatment should be directed based on the presence of plus disease, and generally good outcomes are reported in type 1 and type 2 ROP. Complications of laser could be ocular undertreatment, overtreatment, burns to the various tissues, hemorrhage, hyphema, inflammation, anterior segment ischemia, cataract, myopia, field loss. These are well known, but I think they far outweigh the risk of vision loss. So I think we always proceed with the treatment. And the systemic complications include ocular cardiac reflex and ocular respiratory reflex, for which we need a standby neonatologist. So to conclude, laser is one of the safest and time-tested effective modes for management of ROP. It is imperative that the entire avascular retina anterior to the ridge should be lasered. Laser posterior to the ridge can be applied in cases worsening in spite of adequate laser and cases of stage 4A. Single or multiple sessions of laser can be used to achieve the goal of adequate laser. And I would recommend reading this article for people who are into it for the technical details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prachi. That was a very nice talk that you gave with all the relevant details. Uh, I next move over to none other than Anand Subramaniam. Anand Subramaniam is the head of department at the Haji Bachu Ali Eye Hospital, and he's been practicing ROP and vitreoretina for several years. He's a senior consultant, and he's going to speak to us about the anti-VEGFs in ROP.
Thank you, Karubi ma'am. Thank you, MOS. Thank you for having this IC
Just
and
one quick
having.
question. Why this anti-anti? It is so anti.
So my stand is still a little bit on the ancient anti-VEGFs in ROP.
Okay.
In spite of anti-VEGFs being with us for more than 10 years now, my stand is still very skeptically acceptance of anti-VEGFs. So as we all know, we are in a Zoom meeting. So this is again something which is very ancient. So all of us are in a seance, I think.
I wonder what
Unfortunately,
will
no
come up.
relevant financial disclosures. So I agree with Prachi that laser is the gold standard for treating ROP. There are numerous studies. We have all seen that for the last 20 years and more. But what are the concerns? The last slide, which Dr. Prachi showed us, that it's very important that you have a meticulous coverage of all the bare areas. And I think the most important, apart from bradycardia, apnea, aspiration, and the rest, is that it is a back-breaking procedure. So it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to finish one eye if you want to do it properly in one sitting, and another hour or so for the other eye. So you should be willing to do all this. So if we are not, then we are very happy to just go inside and inject in 1 second and we are out. So we can inject either bevacizumab or ranibizumab. So there are trials going on with aflibercept right now. I don't have those results yet. So what we do is we just go 1 millimeter behind the limbus, stabilize the eye, how Prachi has shown for laser or examination, and just poke the eye 1 millimeter behind the limbus. So what were the indications we were doing anti-VEGFs for is that when we couldn't do any laser, so that is if you had persistent tunica vasculosa lentis, non-dilating pupil, or relentless progress in spite of laser. But it all changed in 2011, that is 10 years back, when we got this BEAT ROP study. So what did it say? It said that you can use anti-VEGFs for zone 1, half zone disease, or APROP as it was called at that time, and now it's AROP. But things got more and more intense when Lucentis published the Rainbow study. So this came out, and now we had the indications that you can use anti-VEGFs in all treatable ROP. So when you have a paper which says use anti-VEGFs, relentless of whatever the stage might be, you can use it. If it is treatable, use it. But like I said, I'm a little skeptical. So I have these concerns. So the first concern was, is it effective? Yes. So when you see the BEAT ROP or you see the Rainbow study, you know that bevacizumab or ranibizumab both are effective. So we have all these studies which says ranibizumab achieved the success which we wanted. But what is concerning about these studies is that the failure rate of lasers were remarkably high. If you say that 42% of the cases are going to be failures, then that's something you have to take with a pinch of salt. The second thing that we have to understand is the timing of injection. It's not that you see ROP and you inject. You have to understand the chronology of the events. So what happens is that you have to understand that ROP is a biphasic disease. Initially, you have increased oxygen where you have lower levels of VEGF. Then you have decreased oxygen and high VEGF levels. So when you say 31 to about 40, 42 and 43 weeks, this is the area where there is high VEGF. And after that, you have the proliferative phase when again the VEGF starts going down. So if you're going to inject before 31 weeks, you'll have severe retinal dystrophy, or after 45 weeks, you have the rapid contraction of your membranes and the total puckering of the retina inside the eye. So you should be very careful as to when to inject. The third concern that I think most of us have, is the quantity of the drug to be injected. What we are right now doing is an empiric basis. Now, if X person says I'm using half the concentration of adult dose, Y person says I'm using 1/3 the concentration. So all this becomes very, very interesting when we have to inject only 0.05 ml in the adult. So there are these studies which have been done, which says a dose of bevacizumab as low as 0.031 milligram was also effective. So if you're comparing alternative dosages, they say that even the 24% of the standard adult dose is effective as 40%. So how do we calculate all these things? When you have 0.05 ml and you say half it is 0.025 ml, and below that, how are we going to calculate? The next concern is the reactivation and the endpoint. So if now Prachi has done the laser for the babies, she's absolutely sure that there's not going to be any reactivation once the whole thing is regressed. But that is not the case when we're going to inject and we're going to have a monotherapy of anti-VEGFs. If that happens, we have seen recurrences coming up even from 49 to 69 weeks PMA. So which means what? We have to keep examining things which are bigger, and they are not going to let us examine. In the Western world, it's quite all right. They'll put them under anesthesia and see them. So every month to have an examination under anesthesia is going to be difficult, and we need to follow up these children for at least 2 years. So this is an interesting article that I found in the recent study. I think we should all go through this, where they followed up the children for up to 4 years after the treatment with bevacizumab. So what they found is that you have these various types of recurrences seen on fundus fluorescein angiogram. You say that it is regressed, but once it's regressed, you still have these leakages coming up, and you have a new site of avascularity coming up after some months. So these types of vessels have to be seen. So nowadays, every one of us have got photographs. We should get the angiograms also to make out these types of new vessels, dichotomous branching, and you have these areas of new vessels coming up when they get regressed and then reactivated. So these are the cases where laser has been done, and you can see that this is absolutely all right, but this case is where an injection has been done and you find recurrences coming up. More of such instances. So the major concern, I suppose, is whether bevacizumab enters the systemic circulation. Yes, we have found in animal models that they do enter the systemic circulation, and ranibizumab also enters the systemic circulation. So if that is so, why are we worried? Is because many of these cases have organogenesis happening during that time. So whether it's going to have a systemic implication, we still are finding out. So there are reports which say that there are neurodevelopment outcomes and are affected because of bevacizumab injections. Now we don't know what to inject. Now we have 2 studies and the third one is going to come up. So are we going to inject ranibizumab and have more recurrences? Are we going to have aflibercept? And we don't know what's going to happen to that. So finally, I suppose anti-VEGFs are here to stay. They are a viable alternative, but I would say that we still have to have a little bit of skepticism while we are injecting with anti-VEGFs, and we should follow up these babies meticulously for at least 2 to 3 years. And I would say follow it up with complete laser as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand. That was a very crisp delivery of this anti-VEGFs and where we should use, and the preferential choices for using the same. You had a way of delivering it very nicely to even someone who's a youngster and going to start his ROP work. To go over to myself, for my own topic, which is on the rehabilitation of these preterms. I'll just start my screen share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
And you can hear me too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to talk today about the visual rehabilitation in preterms. Now, all is well for the patients who have been treated on time and everything goes well with them, but there is a subset of patients who need our help. Now, what is the need? Need is because the sight is a key stimulus to a child's development, and sight is a development process which does not happen automatically. So you have to watch it, and if it requires some kind of a prop, you have to act as a prop and give whatever the child requires. Now, what are the dictums? The early intervention is the dictum in these children. That is, after they have finished off growing nicely, their ROP has abated, and their visual development, where the macular development has occurred at the 5th month, you go over and rehabilitate them visually at the 6th month. And this is true for all children who are not only preemies but also children of all other age groups. Now, what are the categorizations we have? We have preemies who land up with no glasses, which is just a 2 or 3% probability. There are preemies with glasses with normal kind of vision, preemies who have high refractive errors, preemies with treatment done with low or high refractive errors, and preemies who are refracted and have refractive errors following surgery, preemies with hearing disorders, and preemies with multiple disorders, that is CVI, mental retardation, Downs, autism, LD, dyslexia, and following any of the risk factors like HIE, RDS, and IVH. So these are all the groups. Now you see this side, a preemie who's a normal child but with glasses, and this is a child who has CVI, who is being refracted to the best of her ability. Now the time of screening is at 6 months. Now generally the unaffected people, you check them every 6th monthly if they have glasses for change of the same and change it accordingly, and this you have to go on till 5 years, and then you do it one early. And if a child has a nystagmus because of an associated other problem like albinism or any other issue, then you have to refract them as early as 2 months, because what we have seen is that the excursion of nystagmus, though it may be present, it reduces to a marked extent, and it is better to rehabilitate these children very early in their life. Now, it is generally done by the cycloplegic refraction with atropinization for 3 days, followed by a retinoscopy in preverbal children. Now, the glasses are also first prescribed at 6 months of age, and you know that when the child starts removing the glasses after 6 months or within 6 months, looks above the glasses, squints, or cries when the glasses are worn after comfortable wearing, then you know that it's time to change the refractive errors. So go ahead and do it. But instruct the parents that the first 15 days will be the trial period where the child will do all these things, but not to eat the child, and see that the child wears it. Now, it is like very sad that so many number of children go blind and remain so for the want of a simple optical device, that is the glasses. There are numerous refractive errors which come up, which could be myopic astigmatisms, hyperopic astigmatisms, compound astigmatisms, myopia, hyperopia. Generally, pure myopia, pure hyperopia is there in very, very few children. Now, the vision rehabilitation is done by 4 heads. That is the ophthalmologist, who evaluates, diagnoses, treats, and then prescribes the glasses, exercises, patching, or does the surgery if required. The optometrist, who gives the low visual aids, the optical or the non-optical aids, and this is the rehab is done 33% from braille and to print with low visual aids. And then the therapist, that is the physiotherapist, occupational therapist, the speech therapist, and also the vision therapist, who will treat the multiple disabilities with neurosensory integration and a combined approach, and then they help with the motor planning, accuracy and equilibrium and visuospatial problems in this child, which go a long way towards helping these children with their better quality of life. And schools are also there for these special children, and that is very important because there are all the children grouped over there of the same type, so there is no differentiation and the child doesn't get any kind of mental issues with the kind of disabilities that he has. Now, what is functional vision? It means to use vision to carry out your daily activities. Even if the child doesn't see too much, but if he has enough vision to carry out his daily activities, it is fine. And low vision therapy is one of the ways to encourage the best use of residual vision. And if we have to define residual vision, it signifies the visual capability in a CVI child, which improves only with a multidisciplinary approach. And what is the problem? The problem is somewhere in the cortical lobe, and which causes the DVM, that is a delayed visual maturation. And these lead to problems like oculomotor incoordination, cognitive and perceptual improvement. So the essence is to train residual vision. Now, when we think of the brain, there are some 32 odd centers in the brain which take up if the normal pathway is affected, and that is what we target with all these kind of treatments. This is the visual development. There are certain visual behaviors in these children who are with CVI, that they have visual or gaze avoiding, change of posture, smiling, blinking, facial expressions, or stereotypic behavior. So in these children, you have to first ensure cooperation. You have to teach mother to occlude from home, don't go near the child. Binocular testing is done first, check at 3 meters, frequent change of targets are given, and a constant watch is kept on the child. And if you find a child avoiding with chaotic eye movements, faking, overlooking, head shaking or squeezing, then you know that this is a child with a certain amount of low vision. Now, a person comes and asks you, how much does my child see? You can do this very effectively with a visual function battery. The 8 rules are: first it's PL with orientation, third is the follow, fourth is the follow Maddox rod, OKN, and if he's able to grab toys or objects, he's able to grab a red object, or the obstacle course he can circumvent. You see this child circumventing this. So if the results are more than 0.3, that is the first 3, then the child will be capable of independent ambulation. And the PLT we are all aware with. And the important thing with the PLT and VFB combination is that you can get results which are obtainable in most infants, even in young children with various degrees of neurological impairment. Now, vision testing, I'm not going to go into. These are like multiple charts which are shown to the pre-verbal and verbal children, where you get a rough idea of what would be the visual estimate. The proper frame selection is very important for a child at any stage of life. The parents have to be counseled, and you have to spend time with the patients, explain to them, because the acceptance of glasses is going to go a long way in improving their global development. And also you have to tell them not to to give them techniques to prevent the child from throwing away the glasses. Certain things which you give it late, if the squint develops, then you have to rehabilitate them by charts, sorting, or sometimes earlier they used to have the synaptophore exercises. And the principle of vision rehabilitation was to improve the neural plasticity by improving residual vision. These are the WHO guidelines for rehabilitation, and it can be done by visual stimulation techniques, by visual efficiency techniques, which uses a lot of the perceptuals, and the best contrast mediums are given, and also the utilization which uses optical and non-optical aids. So This is this. So the tenets are: you refract at 6 months. If there is nystagmus or squint or a wandering rays, you refract early at 2 or 3 months. All preterms refract at 6 months. If they have a genetic predisposition, show it to a geneticist. And all DVMs due to CVI, refer early to the people who will help them out with their neurosensory difficulties, as this is the lifeline to visual maturation and general development. The new subset of vision therapy has also come in, and this also helps the child in all their skills, which help them improve their quality of life. Certain prematures have a dual deficiency, that is, they have serious visual hearing impairments, and these are to be tackled to give them a good quality of life, because all that this does is improving the motor skills, cognitive skills, the social emotional skills, the adaptive skills, and the communication skills. So you find that a child who is quite under suddenly starts doing well in school and behaving well and going as per how the parents would want their child to be. So these are the schools, and that is all that I have to communicate where this is concerned. Thank you so much for your kind listening.
Thank you. Very nicely explained, ma'am. And this is a seemingly unexplored area by medical professionals. So this is really inspiring for all of us.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just going to stop share. Yeah, we're back. So, do we have some time? We have about 10 minutes, right? So, to hazard some questions, now I would like to direct a question to Anisha. Please tell us how you would document when you go to examine a patient in the NICU, and what you would document, what would be your procedure like?
So I have a form from my college. It's a ROP examination form. So I fill up that form completely with the details of the patient, the address, the phone number, whatever findings are there, and whatever further follow-ups are there, I document on that. And I give another OPD paper which I have to the patient, and I write on it whatever findings are there. I explain them for the follow-up, and I take a photograph of that also. In
Okay.
case if the patient doesn't turn up and they say that they have lost the paper, so at least I have a photograph in my phone that this was the patient, and I star mark it, so I have that documentation with me.
And if you were to go to the NICU, would you write the same things on the case paper?
Yes, I don't have a card, so I take a case paper and I do that. I have one paper with me, the documented pro forma, and I give it on the OPD paper which I have, so they have a file, so they come back with that.
Yeah, and the important things in this is that when you are documenting it, you have to also mention what kind of drops you are putting for the baby, for how long you have to put it, how many times you have to put it, and what is the dilution that you have to do it, because these carry a lot of weight. And also the notes have to be very, very particular, in the sense that you have to write exactly what is with the child, not just that no ROP seen, not one line like this. Anybody else has got anything else to add to this? Sucheta, Prachi, Anand?
Or that if you're going to the NICU, you should also make sure that the sister writes down those things in the sister's notes that she has used the dilating drops. Anytime they forget to write it because it's just the drops.
Yes, yes.
I mean, medically,
That's
that's
a very valid point that you really brought up, because it does carry a lot of weight. Now, a question for you is that, Sucheta,
Yes, yes, ma'am.
when you're doing your telescreening techniques, these people are kind of sort of taught by the people at Bangalore, and then they have gained their expertise. But how much can you rely on them? I mean, they are really very, very good, or like you have to still take it with a pinch of salt?
So that's what I meant when I said we have this hybrid model. Dr. Anand Vinekar's model is completely different, where the non-physician graders or the technicians are trained to identify, no ROP or mild ROP or referral warranted ROP. But I think it is a pretty much validated program where they have proven and published that 3 months training is enough for any non-physician to be able to identify ROP, because basically it's all about pattern recognition. But at our center, what we follow is we don't, the final diagnosis or grading is done only by an ophthalmologist. Although our technician and program coordinators can diagnose all kinds of ROP, all stages, zones, everything, but legally, to be on the safer side, we always, it's always done by an ophthalmologist. We have a team of 4 or 5 ophthalmologists who are well trained in grading and as well as treatment. So they always get back to us with the laptop, and at the end of the day, the ophthalmologist would sit with the laptop and will grade all the images screened during the baby screen during that day. And within 24 to 48 hours, our reports go back to the NICU. That is what we follow.
And do you find most of the children whom you identify capable of coming, or somebody going there and giving the treatment?
Yeah, it's a rare scenario when we have to go, especially if the baby is on, oxygen supplementation, or baby is very sick, sepsis and all. In that case, we do go out and give treatment there. But I would say 80% of the babies are in a position to come to our hospital to get treated.
What is your kind of area that you're treating? I mean, it goes up to which part of Maharashtra? I mean, the interior part?
Yeah. So our strategy has been to train more and more ophthalmologists in the peripheral districts and empower them to do at least screening and then refer babies to us so that they are no more dependent on us. So at the moment, we are covering 5 districts in Maharashtra: Pune, Satara, Ahmednagar, being catered by HV Desai team. And we have our branch in Jalgaon. The team there has been trained to cover Jalgaon and Buldhana district. And in other districts, other 10 districts of Maharashtra, we have trained ophthalmologists to do screening, and some of them have also been trained to do treatment.
So, if the treatment is done by a treating surgeon over there, if the person faces any difficulties, then they refer it back to you. To your
Yes, they do. Yeah.
That's good. And now we were talking about the telescreening model. So how is it going to be? I mean, I'm very curious. You will say, Alexa, does this child have ROP? And Alexa will say, I don't know that. Is it going to be something like that?
Yeah, so the artificial intelligence based model, it's still in the development stage. To make it a foolproof model, I think it is going to require at least 3 more years of research. At the moment, all the AI models that have been published for ROP are still learning to recognize plus from no plus or pre plus. And in our particular research, we have trained the AI model to identify the zones of the retina and stages of the retina. But if there is no ROP, then it would be difficult for AI model to identify that it is completely vascularized or incomplete vascularization. So we are right now working on that. So basically the aim is for the AI model to be able to diagnose all kinds of scenarios along with the management advice.
I mean, the thing is that many a times for routine conditions, when they don't have answers, because it is what is fed to them, what they recognize. I mean, I would be a little scared. I would rely more on human beings, even if it is paramedical technicians seeing them rather than an artificial intelligence giving me a feedback. What about you?
Yeah, of course. AI or human, non-physician graders can never replace a skilled manpower. They are there to assist us, I think. The AI model can assist us. It will be complementary, not a replacement. Never. It is never going to happen.
Thank heavens. Okay. Coming to you, Prachi. Prachi, a small question that I'd like to direct to you is that now many a times when we are following up patients and they are doing pretty well, there is no ROP which is seen, but they have a small area in the periphery which doesn't vascularize for a long time. So these zones, like maybe it's a 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter zone in the periphery, just 2-3 clock hours. What would you do? Would you laser it, and when would you laser it, and how long would you wait before you would laser it?
So it actually depends on the presentation of how much is the area that is not vascularized. So if it is like measuring more than 2 disc diameters and it is persisting, say, beyond 45 weeks of post-conceptional age, I would go ahead and laser it. Okay. But if it's like a very, very small strip, I don't laser it. I mean, we just observe the child.
Okay. And the thing is that suppose, say, you have a child who's premature, who needs treatment, and the mother has just had COVID. So, what would be your stance at that point of time for doing the treatment, whether
Go ahead and
injectable
treat.
or
Go ahead and treat. Wear an N95 mask and go ahead and treat. I have done that actually.
bravo? Okay, and what is anyways? You just said that your lasers is always the gold standard, and that's your first choice for doing the for any child. But are there any exceptions to that general rule where you would use an anti-VEGF first?
So I would say when the child is sometimes very, very sick, like, when we do a screening also, we see that the child cannot even bear the speculum, the very small infant, sometimes their saturation just drops when we even put a speculum. So we know that these infants, it's going to be difficult for them to tolerate the laser. So that would be one consideration, but it also depends on the NICU backup. So why I'm saying this, like in some NICUs which are very good, they would support you by just intubating the child and say, okay, go ahead with the laser. However, if you don't have that kind of backup, like say in the municipal hospitals and things like that, then it would probably be a better option to just go in and inject and buy some time till the time the baby gains some weight, and then go ahead and do the laser in the next 8-10 days.
Okay. Anand, the question for you is that since we have to use half or one third the dose of the injectable, and if you're using something like ranibizumab, which is expensive, do you do it at one stage or do you do it at different stages? Like, sort of, what is your take for these kind of
I would
babies?
not want to share the same injection with both eyes. So for stability's sake, even if it's Avastin, what we are doing is we are opening a fresh vial for the kids first and then using it for the adults. So we are using a fresh vial so it's not a good idea to have it from the same vial and then give it to both the eyes.
Okay.
But having
So
said that,
even for ranibizumab, you wouldn't give it on the same day, you mean to say?
I would give it on the same day, but different vials.
Different vials. So, but anyways, if you're ordering it only for the child, then you have two vials ordered then.
Yes.
Yeah. What about Sucheta, Prachi, Anisha? Any other?
Yeah. So in our institute, we prefer Avastin over ranibizumab because of high recurrence rate that we've seen, and as a protocol, all the Avastin vials before they are opened, we send a sample for culture, and once the culture report is negative, that is being used, and they are aliquoted under laminar flow in a strict aseptic conditions. So we tend to use two separate syringes, pre-filled syringes from the same vial.
On the same day?
Unfortunately, yeah, on the same day. Yeah, they're often so bad that you can't wait even for a day more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Anand, would you like to follow up your patients who have been injected with a laser?
Yes. Yes. If it is possible, 100%, all of the patients I would want to laser so that I can sleep peacefully at night.
Very true.
True.
The same goes for me too. I don't know what.
I have a question.
Yeah, tell me, Anisha.
I about 2 months back, there was a patient who had come for a second opinion. This patient was thoroughly told only to take anti-VEGF. And he was very well convinced that if he does laser, he will have field defects. The child will have field defects. And eventually the patient did go ahead only with anti-VEGF. And I was told that the outcome of anti-VEGF is so good that there is a resolution of the plus disease. You don't need to do a laser. Now, if this patient again comes back to me, because I have told very specifically, you need laser, and the other person has done anti-VEGF, how am I supposed to handle the patient? Because the patient, I don't know if he's keeping a follow-up. The consultant is very confident that the anti-VEGF has done the work, and I don't know how am I going to handle that patient.
But is he on a regular follow-up with that person who has given him the anti-VEGF?
I have texted the patient. I have no response from the patient, so I don't know what is happening.
Okay. Because the thing is that
You mean?
send it back to him only.
Yeah.
That's the
Because
best.
since Anand sir said that as the article was released that all treatable ROPs you can use anti-VEGF, so now everybody is using it.
Exactly.
And it is as good as eating a candy because it's very easy.
Yeah.
And everybody is keeping a long-term follow-up. And when the complications happen, At least, especially for a young person like me, I'm not very well versed in handling the complications and even dealing with the parents.
We have
Can't
seen
even
so
say
many
anything
of
bad.
these crunch diseases. No, madam has also given us a lot of these talks where you get these sudden crunch diseases after Avastin and this because of inadequate follow-up and recurrences.
So if
So
you
if I may add, so
Anu.
Anisha, I think it also depends on the stage of the disease for which the Avastin has been given. So if it is like just like a zone 2, stage 3 and Avastin has been given, probably yes, it will cause complete resolution with the injection and we may not have to add on to the laser. So that is also possible. It depends on the situation in which the Avastin or the anti-VEGF is being given basically. For
But
the
Prachi,
patient is very
see,
VIP, that is what scares me the most.
for the record, there are people who have that avascular zone which Anand was
No,
showing
no,
us.
I understand. I'm not saying. So what I'm trying to say, why that person or the patient. So it's, I think what the patient says should not be our botheration. We follow whatever we believe in. But what I'm trying to say is whatever the other ophthalmologist must be feeling must be because of the stage also. So, I mean, we have also come across cases where we have injected for an APROP and the baby has done well with just one injection without having to undergo laser and there is full vasculation. There are papers on that also. So
Yeah.
I think
I think important thing is to see where the vascularization has
exactly,
reached. If it has
exactly.
not reached the periphery, then you have to do a laser.
Yes, agree.
Two ways about
Absolutely.
it, you know.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Sucheta, you had
I
something to
think
add?
her.
Yeah. So
Can I
as
add one in this?
yeah, sorry.
I
Go
think
ahead, please.
her contention is that her method of treatment is different. Now, if the patient comes after taking only the anti-VEGF, should she tell that patient to undergo laser? Correct?
If there are avascular areas still left over there.
Right. So I think in such situations, you should stick to what you think is best.
Yeah.
If you want to follow up the baby with laser, you should go ahead and tell the relatives that. We can understand the logic at which the other doctor would have thought of injecting and having a monotherapy. That's valid. But if you feel you have to laser, I think you should write it down, document it. And if the patient refuses, okay, you just take it in documentation
But
that you have
Anand, the
told the
problem
patient.
is that the patient is sitting happy because he thinks that he's doing well. And the only thing is that if he's not being followed up, he may land up with a crunch phenomenon, you know.
Exactly. So
But
then
that's the
they
risk that
should
the
not
patient is
come
willing
back
to
to
take.
you
I
and then
think.
point fingers at you, that madam
Exactly.
pehle karna chahiye tha fir.
I know. Yeah, Sucheta, you had something to add?
Yeah. So I think as long as parents are ready to continue with the follow-up until complete vascularization, it's okay. But in our institute, as a protocol, we always follow it up with laser. We never leave any anti-VEGF treated baby alone. None of our babies has even required a second injection because we precisely do the laser within 2 to 3 weeks of giving anti-VEGF. But I think as for Anisha's situation, I would say things which are not under your control, you just need not worry, just document it as per you can say that this is my protocol. I would always follow it up with lasers and up to parents to decide whether to go for laser or to wait.
I mean, there was a child who had come to me, and the child had developed a stage 3 in a typical ROP, had developed a stage 3 in one eye, and we were following the other eye. So, had laser treatment for the right eye, and we were observing the left eye. But then suddenly the patient said, no, what is the need? I mean, we don't have to come so regularly. So, anyways, I took a sign from them that, if you're not willing to come, you have to sign. So he said, no, I'm not interested in signing also. So anyways, I wrote it in my thing, and he has not followed up till date. I asked the person who had referred whether he had come over there, and he has not even gone over there. So the thing is that there are certain situations like that where you can do nothing. You have advised him. I had given him a call and a message. I've kept the message preserved because in case of any eventuality, I have the message with me that I have asked him to come back. So these are things which are out of your control. You can't do much, because you can't change people's ways of thinking, etc.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I think is our session over?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think so, na? So, anyways, thank you very much for the wonderful talks and the very fruitful discussion which followed after that. I'm glad we were able to discuss it somewhat, because there are problematic issues which everyone faces in their day-to-day practice. And I thank you one and all for the wonderful presentations, and have a good evening, whatever is left of the Sunday.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank